This video presentation has been classified by the ABC as M. It contains material that is not recommended for persons under 15 years.
As well as watching this vodcast, you can watch Good Game on ABC2 every Tuesday night at 8:30 and ABC TV late on Friday nights after JTV.
Hello and welcome to Good Game, the show for gamers, by gamers. I'm Junglist.
And I'm Barjo. Another fun-filled half hour of gamage ahead, Junglist.
That's right, we open up the orange box with not one, not two, but three games. Portal, Half-Life 2 Episode 2, and Team Fortress 2. And in our next evolution of a genre, we take a look at real-time strategy games. We've been playing them for over 20 years, and it's one of the most popular genres, but where does it all come from?
But first up, can you guess the name of the game for this week? Have a listen to Fergus Urquhart. He's the CEO of Obsidian Entertainment, makers of Neverwinter Nights.
I think the first game I ever was really given was a game called Rock and Roll Racing, and I was given it to basically produce the conversion from the SNES to the Sega.
We've already had Rock and Roll Racing as a retro game of the week, so we'll give you points this week if you can name two songs out of its classic soundtrack without looking it up.
But first, it's time for Gamers News. A new study, Kids and Gaming, by the NPD Group, has found that more than 1/3 of children are spending more time playing video games than they did last year, and that PC is the most used system. The average child starts to use a PC at the age of 6. Around half of the children in the study played for 5 hours a week or less, whilst the rest are medium to heavy users, clocking up 6 to 16 hours per week. Soccer coach of Portsmouth, Harry Redknapp, believes that video gaming is having a negative impact on the state of soccer in the United Kingdom. Mr. Redknapp used his column in British newspaper The Sun to say that in the past, working class boys would spend their time kicking a ball about, but now they prefer to play video games. This has meant he's been forced to recruit top players from overseas as British boys' hunger for football has been replaced by video games. Will Wright, the creator of SimCity and The Sims, has been inducted into the British Academy of Film and Television Arts Fellowship. Mr. Wright is the first person from the video game industry to be given the honour, which has been restricted until now to film and television personalities. He will be given his award at the British Academy Video Games Awards, held in London this week. Games nominated for a BAFTA include Nintendo's Wii Sports, Real-Time World's Crackdown, Epic's Gears of War, Capcom's Okami, and Sony's God of War 2. Well, it's time to open the orange box. The latest offering from Valve, including Half-Life 2 Episode 2, the highly anticipated Team Fortress 2, and the quirky minigame Portal. Let's kick things off with our mute friend Gordon Freeman as he rises and shines once again.
Dr. Freeman.
In Episode 1, we saw Freeman and his sidekick Alex hurtling along a train, escaping the Citadel's dark fusion reactor, which was going postal. In Episode 2, they need to find the Resistance camp and shut down the Combine portal for good. Of course, there's lots of obstacles in his way.
Main characters are taken out of action early, which really raises the emotional stakes.
I agree, it's got a lot more of a thrilling horror feel, especially in the early levels. I saw you jump out of your seat more than once.
I did. It's a more atmospheric game than the first one. Often you'll be put into a room where a lot of fighting and action has gone on, and it's up to you to work out what happened.
Yeah, I agree. It's these types of techniques, along with some clever dialogue, that sets Half-Life apart from other shooters. There's more destruction as well. Barns that you recently cowered in are blown to bits, and lifts and bridges react to how much weight you put on them. It's also good to see trees that aren't just 3D poles with 2D bits stuck on them. I'm looking at you, Halo.
Even though the Havoc engine has been around for a while now, it's far from dated visually. The way characters' eyes follow you as you move around the room, and when you bump into them, they apologise and back out of the way. And even the way that Alex gets into the car a couple of different ways, it all adds up to be a greater realism experience, even though on their own, they're pretty small things.
Yeah, Half-Life has always paid attention to the little things, and that's what makes it great. Even around the rooms, there's lots of clutter, like old computers and posters, and we even found a gnome.
I love that gnome, and I really like the way that Half-Life lets you do anything you want during a cutscene. That's how we found the gnome.
Data from the Citadel?
In the control room. They were feeding huge volumes of data directly into the core destruction sequence.
But Badge, if you don't count those Strider, Busters, sticky grenades, there's really no new weapons and only a handful of new enemies.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a walk in the park on normal too, Jung. I only died 2 times, and one of those was because my neighbour's one-eyed cat jumped on my keyboard.
Okay, Badger, what else is in the box?
Up next, Portal.
Ah, yes, it's unusual in that it shows the first-person perspective. I mean, it's obviously common for shooters, but this is a puzzle game.
And I think that's why it's such a unique puzzle-solving experience, Jung. It's got a very science-fiction, quirky atmosphere and hilarious dialogue.
The Enrichment Center is committed to the well-being of all participants. Cake and brief counseling will be available at the conclusion of the test. Thank you for helping us help you help us all.
It takes place in a science training facility. They put you through a series of tests ranging from the very easy to the brain-confounding, hair-pulling to the downright frustrating.
The portal refers to your trusty gun, which you use to make a pathway between 2 points. Objectives can be as simple as getting from a low point to a high point, manipulating electricity balls to their switches, or taking out sentry guns who still say they love you afterwards.
I don't blame you.
The learning curve is perfect. As you progress, skills that you learned in the previous levels are combined and added into the next. All up though, it's only about 3 hours long.
There's some really strong code behind this, Jung. It just hurts my brain to think of how they might have planned out these levels. We'll get back to Orange Box a little bit later in the show.
Dead.
What is best in life?
Careful of the shadows.
Hey, Jung, what's the longest you've ever gamed for in one session?
No breaks?
No breaks, no toilet breaks, nothing.
8 hours.
And what's the longest you've ever studied for, like a uni assignment or maybe some homework?
Probably about 18 minutes.
18 minutes, that long? Well, it's no surprise that educators are now looking to games as a way to teach you stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really.
No way.
Games that carry a serious message, but also entertain. Games today take thousands of hours to create, rake in stacks of cash, and literally reach millions of people around the world. This is one industry that has a lot of power, so it's good to see there are some game makers out there who want to use that power for good. It's time to get serious.
Beans are an important source of protein.
A serious game is a software application developed with game technology and game design principles with the purpose of being educational as well as entertaining. These types of games are in high demand by corporations, for example, who want to teach their executives, or healthcare workers who need to learn a specialized procedure. And all those years spent on the couch with hand attached to consoles seems to be paying off for surgeons in New York, where researchers have found that over a third of them make fewer mistakes in keyhole surgery and perform the operation a quarter faster than their counterparts who did not play video games. Dr. Iyer? Dr. Badger? I always knew I was in training for something. Noah Falstein has worked in game design since 1980. He was one of the first 10 employees of LucasArts and is now considered to be a world expert on serious games.
One in particular, for example, called Remission from Hope Lab, is a project that's helping kids with cancer learn what's going on in their body.
Lymphoma cells already dividing. You've got your target.
Let's do this!
You're flying around as the main character Roxy through the bloodstream and lymph system of a cancer patient. You'll be fighting dangers that strike such patients, such as tumours and the cancer itself. The makers of Remission have described it as kind of like the 1966 movie Fantastic Voyage, in which a diplomat was nearly assassinated, and in order to save him, they had to shrink a submarine and a crew and inject it in his bloodstream.
Attack!
teenagers playing the game have much better retention of their chemotherapy levels in their bloodstream because they're not sloughing off and giving up on taking the chemo drugs that can often make them nauseous.
Reach Out Central is one of the first serious games designed in Australia.
The way in which I tend to describe it is kind of almost like a game version of a soapie. Around 1 in 4, 1 in 5 young people are going through a mental health difficulty at any given time. What we now know is that young people prefer to go online before going and seeking other help.
I think the great thing about Reach Out Central is that the situations are so real. From little things like trying to make new friends to huge things like dealing with grief and death. I guess they're all situations that we find ourselves in, and what I found is you can sort of experiment with different ways you could approach a situation and then apply that to your real life.
It actually gets in there into issues that people don't want to talk about, to alcohol, teen pregnancy, and just sort of those issues that are really taboo now in sort of society.
And because the decisions you make in the game will affect the storyline of the game, you could actually play it 4, 5, 6 times and actually end up on different pathways. And so we're hoping that will kind of continue to engage people as they come back through.
And as we speak, studies are being carried out here in Sydney to determine whether serious games can be used to treat children with ADHD.
It's a disorder where basically a person has a very hard time focusing on things, and they're also full of energy. They like bouncing around from one activity to another activity.
How did you come up with this idea?
Well, we came up with the idea from 2 sort of aspects. One, we all enjoyed games. We all enjoy the aspect of competition and those sorts of things. And then we thought, well, maybe there are ways we can manipulate games to help people, especially teenagers and kids, which are the biggest population of game players.
Is it really hard to do?
Can be sometimes.
What's your high score?
I don't think we've got a high score, actually, but it's more to do with how many times you can get through a challenge. So it's about the challenges, there's lots of them. And it's a story, it's very similar to the game Myst. So if you're actually looking at those sorts of challenges of puzzles and things like that, you'll love it.
When they come in and they sit down, what happens from that point?
We put the rings on their fingers. That's going to measure your heart rate. And these other 2 rings are going to help measure your skin temperature. They play through a series of games. So one of the games might be they're asked to make a stairway from one side of the island to another. You're going to use your breathing to control what you see on the screen, and they'll have a picture of a tree breathing. So they'd have to follow the tree that's breathing and breathe like the tree. The rings will measure their heart rates, and the stairs will appear.
So do you see this kind of treatment as a possible replacement for medication?
I don't think it'll ever be a replacement for medication because there is different levels of ADHD, and the severe levels often do need some kind of medication like Ritalin. But I think it would be an excellent thing to use in addition to medication.
The Battle for the Bronx is another Australian development which asks players if they've got their asthma under control.
Basically, it's a city of lungs where it's the Air Force versus the triggers. So you've got characters like Deep Breath, Alveoli, Dusty Blossoms, people like that. So it's a lot of fun. And what we wanted to do is have a fun video element, so we're telling a story that all ties in with controlling your asthma.
Serious games are certainly a serious business, and with all the money being made with games, it's good to see some of that coming back and making a difference in people's lives.
Good game!
Ah, look, it's little Thomas playing with his puppy.
Why? Who would do this to a defenseless animal?
Why? None other than the first-person shooter, the FPS. The FPS and you. Now, Thomas, you're probably asking, what is FPS? It's an acronym, but contrary to popular belief, it doesn't stand for Frank Plays Saxophone or French Puppy Surgeon. Why, it doesn't even stand for 4 porcelain stallions. No, it stands for first-person shooter. You may ask yourself, but I'm not a gamer. Why should I be concerned with first-perspective shooters? You've ignored the fact that FPSs are more integral to everyday living than you realize. People use FPS in the dating scene, the kitchen, and even in hospitals across the country. People from all walks of life combine in the glory of FPS. Bakers, aristocrats, fancy lads, warlocks, President Donkey Kong, foreigners. Yes, they may come from far reaches of the globe, but they all speak a common tongue, the glorious language of the first-person shooter. And finally, young Thomas, a glimpse at how the FPS is made. You take 1 part weaponry and multiply it by the first perspective. Add 2 dashes of heroism and bravery to the power of BFG 9000. Insert ample amounts of unguarded medkits and ammunition caused by insufficient henchman training and heat 550 and it is unbroken because it doesn't interact with the ownage. And there you go, Thomas. Do you truly understand the wonderful world of the first-person shooter?
Oh boy, do I!
Ha ha ha! Boom! Headshot!
Character customization is taken to a whole new level in Drawn to Life for Nintendo DS.
You are the creator, and that's just what you do, using the DS touchscreen to draw your own character, as well as vines, trees, buildings, platforms, vehicles, and statues throughout the game.
Apart from the draw your own feature, it's a pretty stock standard platformer. You'll be moving through increasingly difficult levels, finding coins, finding missing pages from the Book of Life, finding lots of lost villages, and thus returning your village and its inhabitants, the reposers, to everlasting happiness.
Yeah, Badge, and I saw the platforming side of things as nothing really special. The question is, does the draw your own feature take this game to a new place?
I think it does, Jung. You know, it makes good use of the dual screen, and it allows you to zoom right in and control every single pixel if you want to. You do have to draw within the boundaries of the game so it can be animated properly.
And once in-game, your character is quite well animated too.
When you take damage, you lose pixels. You get naked.
And I liked wielding my snowball gun that I drew myself.
Final thoughts, Marjo? I think we're going to see this feature used a lot in future games, especially if it's done this well. You know, it's a bit of fun for families and for anyone, really. I'm giving it 7 out of 10 pixelated chickens.
Yeah, the platforming thing wasn't really anything special to me, and the amount of text that you have to spool through pressing with the A button was similar to Super Paper Mario, you know? You wish the developers would just whip out a big red pen and cut out half of it. But I did enjoy being the creator, so I'm giving it 6.5 out of 10. Okay, gamers, get comfy and ready to absorb the knowledge.
Watch this, and tomorrow you can impress all your mates with your real-time strategy knowledge.
Gamers have been playing RTS games for over 20 years now.
And with the likes of Age of Empires, Command & Conquer, Supreme Commander, World in Conflict, all coming out in the last year, it's a genre in its prime. But where did it all start? Real-time strategy games are, as the name suggests, a game that requires high-level planning and thinking, with the game played in real time rather than in turns. The focus of RTS games is often on war and conquest, and the player takes on the role of Commander-in-Chief with total control over resource management, building bases, and assembling an army to fight. So what was the first RTS game? Most people would shout Dune 2. Actually, before Dune 2 came along, there was another game called Ancient Art of War by Broderbund in 1984. More influential was Herzog Zwei, which was released for the Sega Genesis in 1990, and it was way ahead of its time. You took control of a plane that had the power to either land on the ground and fight, or construct units at your base which you could later pick up and drop off. Your primary objective was to use units to destroy the enemy base. Oh, and it had a 2-player mode. But as good as Herzog Zwei was, it wasn't until Dune 2 came out in 1992 that the RTS genre really took off. It was created by Westwood Studios and was based loosely on the Dune books by Frank Herbert. The game has almost all the elements found in most RTS games today. It was the first game that allowed you to use a mouse to select and issue orders, base building, resource gathering, and tech trees to unlock better units. Each faction had their own unique unit and super weapon, and at the beginning of each map you had to explore the battlefield through the fog of war. The game sold 600,000 copies and really kicked off the RTS genre. So Dune 2 was the first modern RTS game, and was followed up soon after by two seminal titles. They were Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, the first of the hugely successful series for Blizzard in 1994, and Command & Conquer, another title by the groundbreaking Westwood in 1995. The first Warcraft game introduced the idea of a fantasy setting, spellcaster units with magical abilities, and also introduced the idea of builder units, who would also gather your resources. The game also introduced skirmish mode, which has been a staple of RTS games since. Command & Conquer took a different path. It had two vastly different factions with completely opposite playstyles, live-action, full-motion video cutscenes,
I am king,
and a rock techno-fusion soundtrack. It also supported up to 4 people in multiplayer, which was just the icing on the cake. In late 1995, just after Command & Conquer, Warcraft 2 was released and expanded the story of Azeroth further, mixed with superb Super VGA graphics and a cheeky sense of humour.
Are you still touching me?
And although it was a fantastic game in its own right, what really set this game apart were some third-party features. A custom map editor that was so good that Blizzard ended up using it themselves, and which kickstarted the modding community. And Kali, a network emulator that allowed people to play games over the internet, spawning a vibrant competitive scene. 1997 was a great year for RTS games. Bungie, the makers of the Halo series, released Myth. Ensemble Studios released the first Age of Empires game, and Australians Auron released the acclaimed Dark Reign. But probably the most significant of the 1997 games was Total Annihilation by Cavedog, which was the first game to use true 3D environments and units, and offered a superb interface that allowed you to give units multiple orders. Cavedog also supported the modding community, allowing players to download new units from its website, as well as use tools to create their own. Which brings us to what many consider to be the pinnacle of RTS, if not gaming as a whole, StarCraft. Released in 1999, this game by Blizzard had an engaging storyline combined with unparalleled gameplay and enormous diversity. Despite having 3 completely unique factions which allow for a multitude of strategies, Blizzard had spent oodles of time balancing each race. This, as well as the use of the Battle.net system for internet multiplayer, has seen the game played competitively even now. Along with its expansion Brood War, it has sold 9.5 million copies and has become a national pastime in South Korea. So that was then. The current trend in RTS seems to be in ramping up the scale of battles. For example, Supreme Commander or the Dawn of War series that will have a whopping 10 unique races after the next expansion. Another trend seems to be in providing atmosphere and realism, such as in World in Conflict and Company of Heroes. With all the modern tools of better graphics and AI, it'll be interesting to see how developers balance the demand for increasingly complex and sophisticated games with new players trying to get to grips on the RTS genre in the first place. At the very least, it's an exciting time for any RTS fan. And now for the Orange Box multiplayer offering, Team Fortress 2, which has been 9 years in development. There's got to be some kind of record, John.
That's true, although they weren't working on this version the whole time. They went through about 4 different games before deciding on releasing this one. It has a neat sort of animation look that goes beyond cell shading to create a style all their own.
Like the original, there's 9 unique classes, and in TF2 they're even more character-driven, like the wacky engineer who has ammo dispensing units and turrets and teleporters.
Then there's the heavy, who's big, slow, and can take massive amounts of punishment. He also has a damn large chain gun.
I call it chain fun.
My favorite is the spy. He can dress up his enemies and turn invisible for a short amount of time. His backstab is an instant kill, and he can sabotage turrets.
Symmetrical teams will face off as red versus blue with 6 maps from release, including the classic old-school 2 forts. As expected from Steam, there's a lot of stats included which they'll use to adjust the game for balance in the future.
It's constantly giving you stats on how much damage you're doing, it gives you music and sound effects when you do well, and it announces to the whole server when you're dominating another player.
I'm a bit worried about how long people will stick around though. It's good enough to be a classic, but
Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, I think clan matches are going to be pretty fun and pretty funny, but I do have my doubts as to whether the game will be taken seriously. Some things still need to be worked out, like the map granary, which always seems to end in a stalemate. I do like, however, that if no objectives are completed, it moves into a sudden death mode with no respawns.
It can get pretty crowded too, seeing as most maps are in close quarters, so it's a good thing you walk through your enemies and you don't collide with them. I think we'll start seeing some good combos as well, like a heavy and a medic.
At the moment, this is pretty powerful. The medic can take cover behind the heavy while healing him, and if the medic decides to make him invulnerable for 10 seconds, that's a lot of pain.
It kind of reminds me of the tank-healer combo in role-playing games. Overall, the multiplayer component of Orange Box leads for some hilarious, hectic fun.
Well, seeing as the Orange Box comes as one package, how about we rate it that way?
Alright, well, as a package, it's got strong single player, strong multiplayer, and Portal's a really unique game, so I think I'm going to have to give it 9.5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Wow, well, I'd agree. Every aspect good enough to be considered a classic, even if the longevity might not be there. I'm giving it 9.
Good game!
Okay, gamer dudes and dudettes, slightly different retro game question this week. Fergus Erghart's first job in the industry was rock and roll racing. We asked you if you could name 2 songs out of its classic soundtrack.
You could have picked Paranoid by Black Sabbath, Peter Gunn Theme by Henry Mancini, Highway Star by Deep Purple, Radar Love by Golden Earring, Born to be Wild by Steppenwolf, or Bad to the Bone by George Thorogood.
Let the carnage begin!
This classic game was made in 1993 for the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It was made by Silicon and Synapse, who are now known as Blizzard Entertainment.
Well, that's it for this week, gamers. Next week, we take a look at a role-playing game based on Polish novels. It's called The Witcher. It's got the Eastern Europeans excited, but does it translate down under?
And another classic book comes to video game life, Conan. It's an action-adventure title aiming to compete with the likes of Heavenly Sword and God of War.
And next week, we chat to some older gamers. They're here to play, here to stay, and they've got something to say.
Damn it!
Don't forget to send in your plays of the week.
And if you've got any comments on our show, or gaming in general, please drop by our forums and leave us a post. Until next week, gamers, Barjo out.
Junglist out.